In 1983, Michael Jackson stepped onto a stage wearing a single white glove covered in rhinestones. Within seconds, that glove became one of the most iconic fashion statements in entertainment history. But here's what almost nobody knows. That glove wasn't a fashion choice. It was a desperate attempt to hide something Michael was terrified the world would discover. And the real story? It's nothing like what you've been told for the past 40 years. See, most people think Michael wore that glove to look cool, to be different, to create mystery. The tabloids said he was eccentric. The media called it a gimmick. Even his own brothers didn't understand it at first. But Michael's makeup artist, Karen Fay, who worked with him for nearly 3 decades, finally revealed what was really happening beneath that glove. And when you hear it, everything about Michael Jackson's transformation suddenly makes sense. But before we get to that revelation, you need to understand where this story actually begins. Because the glove wasn't the start of Michael's secret, it was just the first visible sign of a condition that would eventually consume his entire life. A condition his own father mocked him for. A condition that would drive every creative and personal decision he made until the day he died. Michael Jackson had just released Off the Wall, and he was on top of the world. At 21 years old, he had the smoothest brown skin, a radiant smile, and a confidence that lit up every stage he touched. He was already a superstar, but he was about to become something bigger, a global phenomenon. But in late 1981, something started happening to his hands. Michael noticed small patches on his fingers where the pigmentation was changing. The brown skin he'd been born with was developing spots of lighter color. At first, it was barely noticeable, maybe a spot the size of a dime on his left hand, then his right hand. Then they started spreading. Michael went to see a dermatologist in Los Angeles. The diagnosis came back: vitiligo. It's an autoimmune condition where the body attacks its own melanocytes, the cells that produce skin pigment. There's no cure. It's not contagious. It's not dangerous, but it's permanent and it's progressive. The doctor told Michael the patches would continue to spread, possibly across his entire body. There was no way to predict how fast or how far. For Michael Jackson, this wasn't just a medical diagnosis. This was an identity crisis. Let's go back. Michael Jackson had just released Off the Wall, and he was on top of the world. At 21 years old, he had the smoothest brown skin, a radiant smile, and a confidence that lit up every stage he touched. He was already a superstar, but he was about to become something bigger, a global phenomenon. Michael was a black artist who just crossed over into mainstream pop success. His identity as a black man was central to who he was as an artist. The Jackson 5 had been part of the Motown empire. Off the Wall had been produced by Quincy Jones, a legend in black music. Michael's entire foundation was built on his heritage, and now his skin was betraying him. He tried everything to stop it. Dermatologists prescribed topical treatments. Nothing worked. The patches kept spreading. Both hands were heavily affected. His face was starting to show signs. Michael became obsessed with covering the patches. He wore thick makeup. He started avoiding bright lights during photo shoots. He became terrified that someone would photograph his hands up close, but he had a problem. He was about to record the biggest album of his career, Thriller, and he was scheduled to perform on a television special called Motown 25. Yesterday, today, forever, the whole world would be watching in high definition. There would be close-ups. There would be cameras everywhere. That's when Michael came up with the glove. Here's what his costume designer Bill Witten revealed years later. Michael didn't want a pair of gloves. He specifically wanted one glove. Why? Because he thought 2 gloves would look like a deliberate fashion statement, like he was trying too hard. But 1 glove? That looked accidental, spontaneous, cool. It looked like Michael Jackson being Michael Jackson. But here's where the story gets even more calculated. Michael didn't just grab any glove. He spent weeks designing it with Witten. And every single choice he made had a specific psychological purpose. This wasn't fashion, this was camouflage. The glove had to sparkle. Why? Because when light hit those rhinestones, your eyes would be drawn to the glitter, not the skin underneath. It had to be pure white, the brightest white possible, because white reflects light and creates visual confusion. Your brain can't tell where the glove ends and the skin begins if there's enough contrast and shine. And it had to cover his entire hand, past the wrist, almost to the elbow. Because by 1983, the vitiligo had spread up his forearms. On March 25, Michael Jackson stepped onto that Motown stage wearing that glove for the first time in public. He performed his song Medley, and then something happened that changed music history forever. He moonwalked for the first time on national television. 50 million people watched that performance. And everyone was talking about the moonwalk and the glove. Mission accomplished. Nobody was looking at his skin. They were looking at the spectacle. But here's what most people don't realize. Michael's entire physical transformation over the next decade was driven by this same condition. The vitiligo kept spreading. His face was heavily affected. His chest and arms were a patchwork of brown and white. He had a choice. Either let the vitiligo run its course and end up with an uneven, blotchy appearance, or use the pigmentation cream to even out his skin tone by lightening the remaining brown patches. His dermatologist, Dr. Arnold Klein, confirmed this years later. Michael chose depigmentation. It wasn't because he wanted to be white, it was because he wanted to look like something, anything consistent, rather than looking like his skin was diseased. And here's the heartbreaking part that his closest friends finally revealed. Michael's father, Joe Jackson, used to make fun of him, called him blotchy, made jokes about his skin. This was the same father who'd already spent Michael's childhood criticizing his appearance, calling him names, tearing down his confidence. So Michael doubled down on the illusion: more makeup, more gloves, more long sleeves, more control over lighting in his videos. Every single choice was about hiding what he saw as a deformity. But the glove became something else entirely. It became armor. It became a symbol. And eventually, Michael realized he could use it as a tool not just to hide, but to perform magic. And that's when things got really interesting. See, once Michael started wearing the glove regularly, something unexpected happened. Other artists started copying him. Fans started wearing white gloves to his concerts. The glove transcended its original purpose. It became part of the Michael Jackson mythology, and Michael was smart enough to lean into it. He started wearing gloves that were even more elaborate. Gloves covered in sequins, gloves with built-in lights, gloves that he'd throw into the crowd during performances. He transformed his disability into a brand. His choreographer, Michael Peters, revealed something fascinating. Michael would practice his hand movements obsessively, the way he'd snap his fingers, the way he'd point, the way he'd grab his crotch. Every gesture was designed to draw your eye to his hands in motion, never static, always moving, always sparkling, always commanding attention. The glove became a misdirection tool. Watch the glove, not the skin. Watch the performance, not the person. But behind the scenes, Michael was falling apart. His friend David Guest said Michael would spend hours in front of the mirror crying, hating what he saw. The vitiligo had spread to nearly his entire body. His natural skin color was almost completely gone. And the tabloids were vicious, calling him a freak, accusing him of bleaching his skin, making up stories about him sleeping in an oxygen chamber. Michael rarely corrected the rumors. His publicists would issue statements, but Michael himself stayed mostly silent. Why? Because explaining vitiligo meant admitting vulnerability. It meant admitting his body was out of his control. And control was the one thing Michael Jackson demanded in every aspect of his life. Here's something even his most devoted fans don't know. Michael had multiple gloves made for every performance, sometimes 5 or 6 identical ones. Why? Because the makeup he wore on his hands would stain the glove fabric. By the end of a concert, the inside of that white glove would be brown with foundation, so he'd swap them out between songs. His costume team had to wash those gloves by hand with special detergent. They couldn't be thrown in a regular washing machine because the rhinestones were hand-sewn and would fall off. Each glove took hours to clean and maintain. But the real question is this: if the glove was meant to hide his vitiligo, why did Michael keep wearing it even after his skin was fully depigmented? Why did he wear it all the way until his final rehearsals for the This Is It tour in 2009? The answer reveals something profound about who Michael Jackson really was. Michael's skin was fully lightened. The vitiligo had spread completely. There were no more brown patches to hide. He could have stopped wearing the glove, but he didn't. Because by then, the glove wasn't about hiding anymore, it was about identity. Michael Jackson without the glove wasn't Michael Jackson. It had become part of his armor, part of his mystique, part of the character he played on stage. The glove was the bridge between the vulnerable man who hated his reflection and the invincible performer who commanded stadiums. His daughter, Paris Jackson, said something revealing years after his death. She said her father taught her that sometimes you have to create a version of yourself that's stronger than the person you are inside. That's what the glove was. It was the physical manifestation of Michael's refusal to let the world see him as weak or broken. When Michael died in 2009, he was wearing a glove during his final rehearsal. It's in the This Is It documentary. Even in his last days, exhausted, struggling with insomnia and pain, he put on that glove. Because without it, he wasn't the king of pop, he was just Michael, the boy from Gary, Indiana, who never felt beautiful enough. So here's the real reason Michael Jackson wore that white glove. It wasn't a fashion statement, it wasn't a gimmick, it was a shield. It was a disguise for a medical condition that stripped away his identity. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. It became proof that sometimes our deepest insecurities can become our greatest strengths, if we're brave enough to own them. The glove never hid Michael Jackson. It revealed him, the perfectionist, the showman, the wounded artist who turned pain into power, and that's a legacy that goes far beyond any piece of clothing. If this story changed how you see Michael Jackson, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're the King of Pop channel, and we bring you the untold stories behind the legend. Drop a comment telling us what you want to hear next, because we've got secrets about Michael that will blow your mind. Stay tuned.